right, today we're back to work on the C6 competition drift car build. We got this thing in the shop after its first competition. Fortunately, we now have one under our belt. The car did really well mechanically. It held up great. Everything performed and worked as it should. So fortunately, we don't have a ton of work to do there, aside from the obvious maintenance stuff. But the next round is coming up quick, and I really want to get this thing looking finished for this round. So it's time to focus on the aesthetics. So we need to do our part, getting the back window done, getting the front splitter on, fixing the light damage, broken headlight tab and quick latch mount from hitting the front clip, and get all that sorted and get the car ready, because in a couple days here, we're gonna be taking it down to Project Prime to get it wrapped. We've already figured out the livery, the whole design. It's gonna be sweet. So hopefully we can hustle, we can pull this off, and we can show up to round 5, which is in just over a week, with a complete car, both mechanically and aesthetically. So that being said, we got some work to do. We're gonna dive into it. So if you saw the last episode working on this car, we were working on the rear window. So the material we got from Home Depot was just not ideal for doing it. It just was not flexible enough. It kept cracking. So we got a specific Lexan sheet. I ordered it online. It's here. It came rolled up in this box. So I imagine it's got some good flex to it. So hopefully this one holds together and we can get a back window in this thing finished up. That's really the biggest thing on my priority list, along with going over the car mechanically, because we're gonna be dropping it off to get wrapped and picking it up from there and going straight to the track. So we've gotta make sure this thing is 100% ready before it leaves here to go get wrapped. It's a bit of a tall order, so I should probably quit jibber jabbering. We should get into it. So instead of making our rear window out of one big piece of Lexan, I decided to split it up. So I'm making this rib that's gonna go down the center and be our center point, basically almost like a split window type deal. And then the Lexan is gonna be 2 halves. So that way we have essentially 2 separate pieces if anything were to happen. So we need to get this rib lined up perfectly center, otherwise it's all gonna look off. And we also have to shim it up to match the height of the rest of the structure that the window is gonna be mounted to. So it was a little bit tricky, a little bit of finagling, but we got it Clecoed in, everything looked good, so we went ahead and replaced the Clecos with rivets. I have become a big fan of using Clecos and rivets. It is a very easy way to test things on and off. So we take the old windshield that we tried to make and that split on us and mock it up and make sure that the shape is still what we're going for. And we need to find center, since we're going to be making this out of 2 pieces. And we're going to be using the old windshield as a template. Now, this is going to save us a ton of time. The absolute hardest part when we tried to do this originally was getting the shape right, because you'd have to kind of flex it into place and then mark it and then cut it, and you had to sneak up on it. So now that we at least have the shape and we know it fits, all we've got to do is transfer that to the new material, the more flexible material, and get it cut out. Now, another benefit to this material, not only is it going to bend a lot easier than the other stuff, but it's not anywhere near as brittle, so we can cut it with a jigsaw. We had to cut it last time with a grinder and a cutoff wheel, and it was not fun, and it left a lot of slag because you're essentially just melting it instead of cutting through it. So cutting with a jigsaw gave us nice clean lines. We used the factory straight edge on the center since the 2 pieces are going to meet up there. And so far it's looking good. So we start heating it up and then just start working it in. So we start with the top and the back. Since those are flat, there is no curvature there. It's not that big of a deal. And then we start working into the curve on both directions. So we work into the curve on the front, then we switch back to the back, then we switch back to the front. So luckily we made our mistakes with the first piece, and this piece is not only more forgiving, but we're a little bit more proficient in it. We know what needs to be done and what not to do. So I wanted to go ahead and get it attached to the rib. I was a little concerned that this rib material would be a little bit too flexible. I didn't want to go with some super thick aluminum that I have if we didn't need to, but I wanted some structure to be there. So we get it clamped, we get it drilled, we get the Clecos in, and that's window 1 done. Oh, look at that. One side done. So fortunately, we have a lot of Clecos. Now, unfortunately, we don't have enough Clecos to Cleco in both windows with as many mounting holes as we were doing to keep this thing from flexing and cracking. So we had to start replacing some of the Clecos with bolts on this one so that we could use the Clecos on the other one. Now, we're not going to rivet this in. You don't want to rivet with Lexan because that shock of doing the rivet will crack it, and it's not spreading the load well enough. So We're going to use bolts, but for mock-up, it's much easier to use the Clecos than having to drill holes and try to get a bolt and a nut in. It's a lot quicker to drill the holes, put a Cleco in, and then move on to the next one. So with the bolt swapped out, we now have enough Clecos to do this other side. So now we need to get it cut out. Now we do the same process here where we switch to the other side of the material so we can use that straight edge for the middle. So we've got a nice clean line where we need it to be straight, and we've got to cut the rest of it anyway. So we get that one cut out. Easy peasy, and we go ahead and start working on getting it installed. Now we wanted to attach it center first because, again, this is where it really needs to line up since it's backing up to the other piece. And then it's just the same process as before over again. Josue heats it up with the heat gun. This might not be 100% necessary with this material, but better safe than sorry. You heat it up, it bends a little bit better, it's a little flexible and more forgiving. So we start working it in both ways and basically meeting in the middle. So we work in the front and then work in the back and get all the Clecos in, and we're done. We've got 2 mounted windows. Now, we're not across the finish line yet. We still need to drill some ventilation holes. Since we have our radiator in the rear and our fans back there, we need airflow out of here. We need the air to move out of here quickly. We don't want the air to cycle back around and then we're just sucking in hot air again. So we debated a bunch of different methods for this, for ventilating the rear, and we settled on holes. It just seemed like the safest option to avoid cracking it, to drill a bunch of holes as opposed to doing holes and connecting them to do big slots. So we tried to randomize it, trying to make something look random, but also consistent at the same time is difficult. You want it to be random, but intentionally random. If you just go and drill random holes, it's probably not going to look very good. So we spent a little bit of time trying to figure out the combination, and we found a combination we were happy with that we felt looked right and was what we were going for. We got them all cleaned up and deburred because they just get nasty jagged edges, and pulled the tape off and got to look at what we had got done. Wow, look at that.
That looks really good.
God. Nice.
Sick.
Looks actually kind of symmetrical.
All right, well, we did it. We officially have a rear windshield. This is a project that's been hanging over my head for a long time. I wasn't sure how it was gonna go. I knew it was gonna be challenging, so it feels really good to see this thing with a nice back windshield on there. I'm real stoked on how the holes came out. I like the split window idea. I think it looks kind of cool like that. I figured it was worth a shot. Now the benefit to doing it this way is the fact that now that we have 2 pieces, if we were to mess one up, we don't have to replace the whole thing. Whether we did it on install or we got in a wreck or wall tapped or something and flexed this. Now the other thing is with a traditional 4x8 sheet like this, there's not enough room to do 2 full windshields. You can't fit 2 of these on that sheet, just a little too small to fit 2. However, you can fit 2 halves and a full one, or 4 halves. So essentially we can get 2 windshields out of it doing it this way as opposed to one doing it the other way. But yeah, real pumped. Now, the downside is we're not done yet. We have to take this back off because we need to paint a border all the way around it to cover all this up. And to cover all this up. Otherwise, you know, you see right through it. But we're not gonna do it on the outside. It's gonna be obvious and ugly. We need to do it on the inside, which means we gotta take them back off. But I need to wait for Josue to get here to do that. Definitely a 2-person job. So I'm gonna work on some of the mechanicals. So one thing we need to do is we need to swap out our alternator pulley. We have a big pulley on there now, and with my engine RPM and the size of my crank pulley, it's a little too big. The alternator doesn't spin fast enough, and the system charges at like 12.2 volts at idle. It jumps way up as soon as you give it any RPM, but at idle, it's not enough. So what we're gonna do to test the theory and make sure that the smaller pulley is gonna work right is steal the one off the Miata. So we have the same DC power alternator on here, literally the exact same alternator. So I need to pull this off and then pull the pulley off and do the same on there. So fortunately, the alternator on this car is about as easy to remove as possible. It's right up front, up top. I wanted to low mount the alternator on this car, but unfortunately there just wasn't gonna be room with where we needed to run the downpipe. So one of those things, it's up front and it's kind of an eyesore just having it hanging out there, but it is way easier to replace because the Miata one is a low mount. So we've got to get up top, get to the tensioner, get the tensioner loose, get the belt off, and then climb back down underneath to break the bolts free and get the alternator out. And it's a tight squeeze to get it out around the sway bar, but it's not too bad in the grand scheme of things. Still a pretty quick and easy process. So we move over to the bench and we're basically just gonna swap pulleys. Now, if this works out, we're going to get another small pulley for the Miata because that pulley works well for it. But for now, we'll just swap them in case we need to toss the Miata back together. So we get the new pulley bolted on. We've made sure it's shimmed the same. And one thing that's always bugged me is the wiring on this. So it's got this big stock style connector on it, and it's just ugly, and it's front and center. You know, we took our time on all of the chassis wiring, and this one thing just sticks out at you every time you look at the engine bay. So I figured while I had it off and I had it apart, I'd switch it and make it look like everything else. So we put some pins on it for a Deutsch connector, put some heat shrink loom on it, and throw a 2-pin Deutsch on both sides. So that way we get rid of that big ugly 4-pin connector, of which we only need 1 pin, and clean this whole little thing up a bit. So we get heat shrink loom on the post that goes to the battery power, and then heat shrink it all up and we're done. Nice, cleaner looking little alternator wiring deal. Just something, one of those things, you know, there's always those little things that bug you. One of those things I wanted to get done. So we get the alternator tossed back in, pretty simple process, belt tensioned, and then we are ready to move on. And moment of truth, tear off our windshield that's on there and not cracked, and hope we don't crack it. So we start with the second side because since it's clecoed on, it's gonna be easier to remove it because I can pull the clecos out from one side and Josue can hold it and let it work its way up. You know, if you start pulling a few out and it flexes wrong, that's when you're gonna crack it. So we get the first one pulled off, we get it all taped up. Now this is the tricky part because this is something you're gonna see. It's gonna be very blatant if we don't have good tape lines here. And this border is absolutely pertinent. If you look on any factory windshield, you have the same border. So we get it taped up, throw some spray paint on it, just a quick blast with some paint, make sure we get the edges. And then we move on to the other side, get it taped up, get it painted, try our absolute best to match it, and then throw some paint on the little aluminum center bar. This is just something that I didn't want it to stick out and you notice it if the borders we painted aren't big enough. All right, we got our borders painted. We did our best to match them. That was probably the hardest part for sure, especially up here because they're going to be right next to each other. So if they're not matched, it's going to be pretty noticeable. But now we just got to wait for the paint to dry so we can put it all back together and hope that it flexes back into place like it should. So Josue went ahead and fixed this headlight. We cracked it at the mount there. I hit the front clip one too many times, broke the quick latch and broke the headlight, but everything stayed together. So we did a decent job on how we attach the body. So now while we're waiting for the paint to dry, Josue's cleaning out rubber. We're gonna work on some maintenance stuff. There's a lot of rubber, look at this. This is, I'm pretty sure he cleaned it before last round.
There's way more.
And there's a lot more. But anyway, he's working on that. We need to do fluids change. We're gonna do a full fluids change before this round just to make sure she is tip top for the final round of the season. We're also gonna do a gear change. So fortunately, we have the quick change diff now. And we're going to a bank track. So luckily, a viewer sent me like 8 sets of gears, and we actually have a pretty dang good range for what we're trying to do. So this is the gear we had in it. We were running 3rd gear, 96 miles an hour wheel speed. That would put us at 115 and 4th. Now from the one run I did on the OSW oval with dead tires, that's not enough. Now the question mark becomes, do we want to go with a lot of wheel speed on the bank and then downshift in the infield, or do we want to stay in 1 gear? I would like to stay in 1 gear. So we're gonna shoot kind of in between and do this gear, which would be 119 and 4th. If we do need to downshift, we know 96 was a little short on the infield, so 99 should be fine, but I think we can run it all the way through the infield in this layout and not downshift. That would be ideal. If you can save yourself from shifting mid-run, it's just another area to make a mistake. You miss the downshift, car straightens out, you're done, runs over. So that's important to me. I'd like to try that. So I do think we need a little bit more wheel speed just based off what the Miata does. It's got about 114 on the bank and it can get near the limiter. So I think 119 should be a good spot for us. So I'm gonna find that gear, should be number 12, set number 12. Set, how did I grab it right the first time? Set number 12. Boom. So one of the things we noticed that we had an issue with coming loose at the track, since we were nut and bolt checking the car every day before we went out, was the axle bolts. They wouldn't get so loose that they were going to fall out, but they would loosen up and get a few turns on them. So we put these poly locks on those to help keep them tight, and then it was time to change the gear oil in the diff. I wanted to just flush the whole thing since it was brand new. I got this pump. I've had a few of these, and this one's nice and bulky. And what I decided to do on this one, since that bottom hose always pops off, I heat shrunk it to the actual pump itself. So hopefully we don't have issues with that thing falling off, because if it does, then you're digging around in a container of gear oil trying to get it out. Now, fortunately, compared to some of my other pumps that I've had, this thing moves some fluid quick. It's got a really big hose on it, so it was a nice quick process to fill up this diff, which takes a solid 3.5, almost 4 quarts of oil. All right, gearbox fluid is changed, fresh fluid there, fresh diff fluid, new diff gears, and we got our poly locks in, axle bolts torqued. Still got to do a nut and bolt check, and we still need to change the oil. We've killed enough time for our paint to dry, and I'm just too antsy to get these on, see what they look like, if they go on, and if they go on without giving us too much trouble. So let's drop this thing down and give it a shot. So this is it. This is a make it or break it moment. One, our tape line's gonna be good and crisp, and fortunately they are. We did a decent job, got the tape down nice, and we didn't have any bleeding through, which is good, because again, something you're gonna really notice every time you look at this. And now it's time to put them back together. Now this is it. This is the last time, unless we take them off for some other reason, that they have to go back on. So we need to take our time and make sure we get these things on without damaging them. So we heat them back up. This stuff, while it is really flexible, it will pretty much always go back to straight. It has to be curved for a really long time for it to hold that curve. So that's why we were a little hesitant to pull them off and put them back on, because it's basically the same process as putting them on the very first time. So once we got them back on, fortunately with no cracks, it was time to drill out all of the holes that had Clecos in them and replace them with bolts. So the Cleco holes are a little bit smaller, so we've got to just open them up. So still not through the finish line yet. There's still the opportunity to crack this thing we've been working on for so long, just because you're drilling back through it, and this kind of stuff doesn't like being shaken around violently like when a drill catches and yanks. So we're almost there. We're on the home stretch, replacing the bolts on the halo part on the last piece. And what do you know? We made it. We got it done. We got it bolted back in without any casualties. So I wanted to toss the halo back on and the roof back on just to see what it looked like. And as much as I didn't want to, I had the overwhelming desire to just put a few more holes in it. It's so hard when you're doing holes like this. The temptation is real, and every time you're worried that that's going to be the time you crack it. But I wanted to put some holes in the front corners, one, functionally to get some more airflow in and out of the tire, but two, just to tie everything together. I just felt like it didn't look right to have the holes just in the center and the back, so we put some in the front too. All right, well, we did it. We have a rear windshield. Finally, definitely a nerve-wracking experience. Every time you take it off or put it on or drill a hole, you feel like you're gonna crack it. It's just gonna break on you. I knew this was gonna be a challenging project, so I'm really relieved to have this done. We're really happy with how it turned out. I liked the, adding the little holes here in the side. I just felt like it was lacking something, just having the holes back here, and I feel like just a few side holes really ties it all in. I love the way this looks. I'm also happy with the split window idea. Like I said, even though it was for functional reasons, I think it looks cool. I think it adds a little bit of that race car flair to it. And I did test with the fans on, and we are getting plenty of airflow out of here. I mean, there's a ton of air moving here. You can feel a ton coming out the bumper. So I don't think we'll have any cooling problems. I think we've still got plenty of airflow. Let's hope so at least. And the smoke should kind of pour out of here, which probably look pretty cool. So overall, we're pretty much done with the hatch, which means we're done with the aesthetics aside from dropping it off to get wrapped. So it's time to move on to the mechanicals. I want to get this thing out of the shop, let it warm up for a bit, also get a gander of the full picture. It's always a different perspective when you get something out of the shop because you're not in that enclosed environment. I don't know. So I'm sure most of you can attest to that. You pull a car outside in the sunshine, it hits different. So I want to see what it looks like out there too. Two birds, one stone. Before we take this thing off the lift, I want to weigh it. We weighed it without the quarters on and with the hatch still having the glass in it. there was a lot of variables that weren't there. This is a running, driving, complete car. Now that we've got the Lexan, the only thing that's gonna go on here that's not on here is the wrap, which, you know, probably add 10, 20 pounds, but this will give us a really good idea. This is it, complete. So I wanna see what it weighs, see if we're under that 3,000 pound target with me in it. So let's grab the scales. All right, well, these scales are super old, and the battery tray for the 9 volts was just super corroded. So we've got jumper cables to a 9 volt. Oh, don't fall apart. Okay. So that we can do this. All right, Jose, you want to lower her down? Off. 2848. Let's see. Got 53 front, 46.7 rear. It's actually better than it was. All right, let's see what it is with me in it. Dang, that's not bad, 52.2. 30/50 with me in it, 52.2% front. So that got a lot better. I think we were 53.8 last time with like the stuff just kind of crammed on. Oh, we're missing the hood. Dang, played ourselves. All right, final numbers. Without me in it, 2874, 53-ish, 53.6 front. So it's a full percent better than the Miata without me in it. 52.5 with me in it, front bias. It is a little heavier than we were hoping based on the last time we weighed it, but it's still not too bad. 3075, not bad. If we could break under 3,000, I'd be happy. I think if we switch to a carbon top and a carbon hood, you know, that would drop a solid 60 pounds right there. We can definitely drop some more weight out of it. I mean, this is no carbon body panels. So really not too bad in the grand scheme of things. I'm pretty happy with that. I've seen some other similar Vettes with superchargers in the 3,300 pound range. And even some of the other Vettes within A setups that are in the 29, high 29 range without driver. So we're right around the same weight as everybody else, which is not bad considering we've got a giant turbo hanging off the front of this thing. So anyway, that being said, we're gonna put this all back together, put it away, and get this thing outside, like I said, so we can go warm it up and get the oil changed. Splashed the frame rail.
That was my bad. That
Wow.
was user error.
Wow. All right, well, that's it. The car is not only ready to be wrapped, it's all wiped down, good to go, Lexan done, but it is ready for the event. Because as I said earlier, the plan is to literally pick it up on the way to the track. So this is it. This is the last time we are gonna see this thing until right before the event. So we wanted to make sure we were very thorough because this is basically doing all our pre-event prep work now a week out. So I'm going to go ahead and drill these rivets out of the hood vents just to make their lives a little easier wrapping it. We'll have to toss those back on when we get there. My splitter won't be here until mid next week, so we'll try to toss that on at the track. This thing's gonna undergo a massive transformation over the next week, and hopefully we'll be showing up the clutch kickers with it fully finished out aesthetically. So anyway, I'm gonna quit jibber jabber and I'm gonna let you guys go. Next time you see this thing, it'll be wrapped and then on track. So I hope to see you guys for all of that, but for now, that's gonna be a wrap. Thanks for watching, thanks for subscribing, goodbye.